Hello, it's Senior Runner here, and seeing as the earphones video went quite well, I want to choose another similar type video for you today, and we're going to look at shoes. But we're not going to go through the usual video makeup, which you'll see on YouTube quite regularly, because I'm sure you can go through thousands and thousands of videos just like that and choose many of them to look at. I want to be different. I always want to be different for you, and I wanted to provide you with something a little bit more informative that you can actually use this time, instead of thinking, well, that particular shoe costs a hell of a lot and I don't really want to be forking out that amount of money for it. So we're going to be concentrating on quite a wide range of skill now. We're going to be talking all the way from your beginner, all the way through the mid-range, and all the way to probably the top end of the mid-range runner, because I've had a few sort of feedbacks from people, when we get to that top end, does what I look for in a shoe really change, or should it change? Because we tend to go into the shops and, oh yeah, I like it like that, I like that. Will it change? Should it change? And we're going to go through that as we go through the video. Now, I've done this several times, and at first I'm going, oh yeah, we're going to look through the flexibility of the shoe, the weight of the shoe. Should it be light? Do we need to look at the shock absorbency? How about the fit? How about the price? And again, do things change as I get better and improve? And I thought, well, now we're gonna go about this in a little bit more of a rigorous step by step. And we're going to go through fit, form and function. So first of all, the fit. Now, as you can see, the fit of the shoe is basically around the tongue and the heel there, the back that holds the tendon in place. Now, the first thing that I would say about the fit is in fact about this tongue the back section here, not the tongues there. I find that has to be nice and neat behind your tendon. Your tendon curves as it goes around the back of the foot, and as it curves in, this piece here should nicely nestle in behind the tendon. It shouldn't be too tight. If it starts rubbing against your tendon issues are very, very common and very, very difficult to get over. There are a couple of videos I have seen that have been absolutely critically brilliant in certain types of massage for over a certain period of time, and you can get over steadily certain tendon issues. But critically, you don't want to get into that point anyway. So what are the main points about fit? Most people say between half a size and even a full size for some people with big feet that swell a lot. Larger shoe than what you would usually wear. And the reason for this is especially if you're running long distances and you're doing lots of running, your feet are sweating, they're expanding, and they're expanding quite a way, half a size, a full size, and you don't want your foot to be fitting perfectly when you start running, and then you run down the road 13 mile, 14 mile, 15 mile, and then suddenly you feel the foot's really tight inside that shoe, because now your tendon's pushing against the back of against the back of the foot, against the back of the shoe, and your front of your foot is pushing against the tongue, and you're going to find that both start to rub, and the heel tends to take a lot of battering then, because your foot's quite soft now because it's sweating, and your heel's pounding away, and it's actually softer, and the skin's bashing against the bottom of the shoe, and you can get blisters on the bottom of the foot. You can get quite bad rubbing sores on the front top of your foot where the laces would be tied, and worst of all, like I said, you've got the tendon at the back, which if that starts to get rubbed into and pushed and pulled, then you've got really critical health issues. I have seen people wear the wrong shoes. I've seen people not. I've seen people going to half marathons with brand new shoes and come out with blood. Actually, he rang his blood out of his sock. It is bad, guys. So if you have a badly fitting shoe, you're going to incur possibly really quite critical health issues. So, and this is possibly why when I put one of the best things shorts video about beginning to run is to buy new clothes, and a couple of people put a negative comments, and this is really I think where they were coming from. New clothes, new shoes in particular. Great idea. I mean, if they look really, you can get some that look really snazzy, can't you? And you feel really good when you're running in them. And this has got orange in. I've got orange shorts, orange top. I look and feel the biz, but they have to fit. So the fit has to be perfect. Too sloppy, not good, because you're going to get friction. Too tight, you get friction again and pulling and pushing inside that shoe that's going to really cause you problems. So the fit is essential. That's the first thing you're going to do when you go in to buy a shoe, is to just look at the fit. Bang, that's the size I want. How much of a back lip does your foot actually need? Because sometimes you put a shoe on and you'll feel that pushing against your tendon, and you haven't even done any running. And guys, that's just not going to be good enough, because if you start tying that up, lacing it up and running, that tight back against your tendon is going to actually pull even more. And I really do not think that would be a good thing for any runner, because you're going to be out quite quickly with an injury. So the fit side is absolutely critical. The form of it is a little bit more difficult, because this is where things change as you go through the price. So the form and the price and all the other things are now start to mold together, guys. So what's the basic shoe? If I want to buy, I mean, these cost about, in England, they'd be about £30 to £40. I tend to go for shoes. If I could go New Balance, I could go some of the more Adidas or something like that. I'd probably choose about £30 to £60 at the max. So I tend to go through the mid-range shoe quite well. But what is the form of it? Well, we've got the upper, which will give you plenty of airflow into the shoe. And this is partially because your foot's sweating and you're trying to get a little bit more airflow in there to stop it from sweating quite as much. And if you're running with a hot foot, and God, this is really hot, you can feel it when you're running, and you think, oh, this is perhaps not the quite right shoe. So a good airflow is actually quite critical, I think. It just enables you to feel good. Again, keep that feel good factor in. And then you got the heel and the sole, usually one piece of material. And as you go through there's three sections here. There's the cheapo ones, which I call cheap and nasty, and they try and copy the mid-range shoe. So you'll get something like this, but it'll be a chunk of really hard material, and it's just copying the basic look of it and the basic type of material. However, the material's never the same. Nice and flexible. So I try and make, the first thing I'm going to do is it flexible? Is it flexible? As I run, will it bend with my foot? I want it to bend with my foot. I want to feel almost like I haven't got a shoe on, which comes to the weight of it. So is it flexible, and is it light? It is good to have a light shoe. Now, this is where the mid-range shoe starts to change from the advanced shoe. Because as you're getting through to being a more advanced middle runner and onto the amateur status, you're going to find that these shoes, and again, it's another Skechers shoe, nice and flexible, lots of air flow. But what we tend to get here is a solid base, solid sole and a solid heel. As you get into the professional ones, the middle runner, we need to have a quick press inside to make sure that in this case it's foam filled, and it's a really good advanced foam in Skechers, I must admit. And you push your thumbs in there, and it really is quite comfortable. And your fingers and your thumbs pushing on there, you feel that as you're running, that's going to take an awful lot of that pounding, and that extra force up the knee is just going to be absorbed a little bit more by the shoe, but by the inside of the shoe. Whereas if you go for a more advanced shoe and you're paying for the technology and you're paying for the design, because these guys have worked probably flat out on this brand new shoe, and they've designed this shoe, and it's a perfectly made amateur shoe. It won't look like this at the bottom. The actual sole and the heel now become an integral part of the shock absorbency of the shoe. So this is where the middle bit becomes a little bit more difficult for you. If you're at the beginning, you're not going to be going for these high value, high cost shoes unless you really can afford it. In which case you can. But at that end, at the top end, you're talking amateurs can buy a shoe that's going to save an extra couple of seconds per mile, and it's really good for them. That's excellent. But at the beginner's stage, a couple of extra seconds per mile is not going to make any difference to people like you or me in the middle or at the beginning. So we tend to go for shoes that are a little bit more valuable in that, yeah, they in the case of me, it's £30 to £60. We can afford that, and it's nice and light-ish. But I say ish because I'm going to do that. Yeah, it's probably one of the lighter shoes, but the extra weight is realistically in the shoe, and it's the absorbency that I'm looking at, and it's not quite so well designed material because it's not lightweight material. None of it's really lightweight, but it is quite light for a middle-range shoe. The extra weight is coming, a lot of it is coming from the absorbency from the foam inside, and I find that's one of those trade-offs that as a beginner and an early mid runner, you have to start thinking about, because it's great if you can get a shoe that I had a Nike shoe, and an absolutely stunning shoe. And it was within that price range, and it was extremely light. I could run down the road. It didn't feel like I was wearing a shoe. So there are some really great shoes out there. It had a marvelous airflow, really bendy, extremely light. I mean, it was like holding a feather, it really was. But the downside of that is that it probably only lasted 2 months of running. And you got to think, I used to run at that point about four times a week, and after 2 months of running sort of about 10 miles, between 8 and 10 miles in those 4 times a week, it had worn out because it's lightweight. It's not being designed to be heavy duty, so last a long time running wise. So it's got to have some sort of negative point to it, and it wore down easy. So we go in, we make a judgment as to how much absorbency and shock absorbency we need from the shoe, and as a beginner or an early mid runner, you're going to think, well, I prefer more of an ability to take that shock off the knee, and then you go and start to buy the shoe that's a little bit heavier because it gives us more shock absorbency. Yeah, okay, it's a little bit heavier, a bit of a downside. Or we think, well, perhaps we can do with a lighter shoe. Perhaps we don't need the shock absorbency. Now, this is all about your running style, guys. And this is where I know that it may come with a bit of a shock. There's lots of shops out there, professional shops. They have the treadmill in the back. They have the cameras set up. You go in, and yet you pay a relatively decent amount of money to have them tell you what sort of shoe is best for you. I would actually say that's quite a good idea. Even as a beginner runner, if you're thinking about doing it for a long time and improving over a matter of months, years, I would certainly go to one once, just to see what sort of shoe is it that I, at the minute with my running style, am I really needing? Because if they say, well, you're not quite got the posture right, and you're pounding a little bit too much on that front foot. When you go forward, you're pounding on it. So a little bit of an overstride, perhaps, and you're pounding onto the foot. So we suggest you need a little bit more absorbency. So it's going to be a little bit heavier. It's going to be a bit more thickness of foam inside, because you can't afford that. You don't want to be paying the £100 plus for a really good shoe. And they'll tell you what you really need. And if that just costs you once, and you can last probably months, a year, and perhaps try it again in a year's time when you realise that perhaps my forms now change and my running styles changed, and then perhaps you can take away some of that foam, and you can then go into the shop and think, it's very light, isn't it? Not too much foam, so it's not got a lot of shock absorbency inside, and yeah, it's a mid-range shoe, so it's not got any shock absorbency in the bottom. So, but actually, I now know, because I've been to one of these places, that I can get away with a little bit less shock absorbency, and you use it. Now, the one thing I would say there is, if when you start using it, you realise that your knees start to hurt, it's a walking shoe. It's a walking shoe, because then you're risking your health again. So do remember, when you change your shoe and you start to increase the running distance of that shoe, that you need to be able to think on your feet, basically. Are my feet hurting? Are my knees hurting? Are my hips hurting? Are the shoes causing any of this? And if they are, then you need to retire them, perhaps, and have a look at your running style. You could or just completely retire the shoe, and we can make it into a walking shoe. So do be very careful. Your health is absolutely critical. So the function of it is probably the last thing. Now, the function of this shoe is basically that initial test. Does it really bend with me? And this is where I tell you guys, let's not beat around the bush. The cheap shoes, I can literally pick up a cheap, and this isn't a cheap shoe, and I'll be going, they put it, I can't bend and it won't bend, or if it does, it bends a little bit, and the problem is it breaks along there. After about a month, you'll find that this is so solid, it snaps across there, and it's a worthless piece of rubbish that you've just bought. So cheap shoes tend not to be worth their while, unless of course you do the bend test, and hey, it actually bends. It's really quite flexible. Hopefully it's not flexible in that it's more the more you bend it, it snaps down the middle again. But I've not found many. If you do, place it in the comment below, and we can have a look, and we'll I'll even have a little look on the internet and see what we can find, and see if they've sort of managed to make a really cheap shoe that actually really does work brilliantly for you. So please do comment in below if you do. Don't just give me a thumbs down and tell me I'm a load of rubbish. Comment and tell me why. But from what I've learned and used over the many years I've been running, cheap shoes tend not to work. The mid-range shoes are a really good balanced pull back of those things that were good ones. So we call it the product life cycle. As the product goes along, it's being developed, and then all of a sudden you have lots and lots of changes, and then as you get to the most of the changes being finished, the shoe will probably stay in the same function and the same look, because there's very few changes to it. And once it gets that top level, they may decide to retire that shoe, or pull it back from professional or sort of amateur status and start selling in bulk to the middle runner. And that's the point where you can start taking, the benefit of all this design that did happen about 5-10 years ago. And that's what we're looking for as a middle runner. So you start as a beginner, and you're going to be looking for those shoes that mimic the high end, nice and light if you can. Adjust the thickness of the foam to make it more shock absorbency, dependent on how poor your running style is. And let's face it, as a beginner, you're going to be making some mistakes. That's why we're beginners. And at the beginning end of the mid range, you've probably still got some little tweaks that you can still make. So the style's probably not quite there. So you can still make those little errors that mean your foot's not quite landing flat. It's landing to the left, to the right. You've got a foot flick to the left, right, or you're stamping a little bit too heavily because you're over or under striding. And everything has to be thought of at the early middle range. But as you start getting into the middle and the late middle area, you have to start thinking about, do we start bringing in some of these more expensive shoes? Now, as you start doing that, like I say, the sole and the heel this one actually has quite a really flexible heel. If we actually, I don't think you can see it, but it's quite, that is actually quite soft. But it's also not too bad wearing wise. That's actually not worn down too badly in the month that I've had it, couple of months I've had it. But it is actually quite flexible, the actual sole itself. So we start to develop, and we can remove the foam inside. And the reason why we can remove the absorbency inside the shoe is because we can now start to, I can afford to have the absorbency by specially created designers in the actual bottom of the shoe itself. Now the heel has its own little bit of absorbency, and the sole has a bit of an absorbency, so you don't really need as much foam inside. And this means, because we're taking away some of the material at the base of the shoe and taking away some of the material inside, it becomes a hell of a lot lighter. And running in a light shoe is amazing. I did that with a medium range shoe from Nike, I think it was, and it was phenomenal. It was like running on air. You just didn't have any shoes on at all. And this is an example of some of those design changes coming from the amateur shoe into the mid-range shoes. So you can find them. Just look for them. Flexible, yes. Light, hell yes. Will it take my shock absorbency? Hey, this is really quite spongy. The only downside, like I say, it wore out quite quickly. So you're buying probably twice as many shoes. But as you get to the top end, that's a good point to make, because you're saving seconds, and at that point seconds means a hell of a lot, and all of a sudden the feel-good factor is brilliant. If you get a light shoe, and yeah, if I went back to that brilliantly feather light shoe and I wore it against something like this, which is actually light, but against the feather light one, it's heavy, then I'm feeling that momentum as I'm running, and I can feel it as I swing my foot back. I can feel the weight of the shoe sort of pulling me backwards. It does have momentum, whereas the Featherlight one doesn't, and it doesn't pull you back, and it doesn't pull the foot back. So you actually get an improved performance, and you actually get a hell of a lot more improved feel-good factor. So we try, when we go to the function side, we need to be looking more at how much can I move that to a designed shoe. So as we move to that designed shoe, it has to be in line, I think, with our posture and getting our posture correct. So as you improve your performance, your posture is probably getting quite good. Certainly as you get to amateur status there, most of those people will be running with a posture that is absolutely almost spot on. And the requirement for shock absorbency then is not as great, because they're not pounding the floor like a beginner would, or an early mid range runner would, because their posture and the way they move their feet is a lot better and a lot more efficient. So because they've got a better efficiency at running, they can afford a lighter shoe. So do things change as you move along? Absolutely. Remember that, because at some point your efficiency will improve. Going into the shop and buying the same shoe then becomes a little bit negative, because if I was to suddenly start running absolutely spot on efficiency wise, and I'm not great on the efficiency, I do need to change some of my styles. Even now, I can tell you what I need to do. I tell you guys what to do. Do I actually do it myself? I try to, but I just can't seem to keep it going for enough time wise. So at some point, if I suddenly started running absolutely spot on efficiency wise, I would be able to get rid of the foam inside, and I'd be able to think, well, perhaps I could just see if I can even go a step further and get something a little bit more advanced later on, where you've got the actual material at the bottom taking some of the absorbency. And it's a combination of the two that changes as you go forward. So first of all, you'll start removing the foam inside because it's not needed, because you're running better. And then as you get to even more towards the amateur status, you've removed the foam, and now you're starting to think, well, I can remove even more of that weight of the middle shoe, of the top half of the shoe, because the bottom half is going to be removed, is going to have a lot less weight in it, and it's going to be designed in such a way it will take a lot of the pounding on the floor. So it's taking the shock absorbency. So now you're sort of removing the foam, and then you start to remove the need for the whole weight of the shoe, and you end up with, at the end, an amateur status. And guess what? You're running on an air light or feather light shoe that you don't even realize you've got under your foot. So hopefully that helps, because I think there's a lot of videos on here that try and take you through a particular shoe. Oh, this shoe, look, we ran in it we gave it to 3 people, they all ran in it, and we all gave it a score for flexibility, for weight, for performance, and these are the scores for these 3 different shoes. And yeah, but they've all been given them by the industry. So yeah, Adidas will have given them a shoe, and the other big manufacturers and big names will have given them a shoe, and all of a sudden, oh, they've got these shoes for free. We'll test them all out, score them for you, and say how good they are. And I just thought that we needed somebody to say, in a more detailed point, so not sort of like just 30 seconds or 5 minutes, what do we do when we go into that shop? So that's that. I just want to quickly go through bullet point by bullet point. Flex and bend. Yeah, try and bend it, flex it. It has to be flexible, really, because that's what it's going to be doing under your weight as you go running. Look at the weight and look at the flexibility and the absorption. So look at the weight and the absorption and try and balance the two. So it's nice to have a nice lightweight shoe, but there's a certain amount of absorbency and shock absorbency your body needs. And that's where I may say, have a go, because you can't really take a shoe from a shop like TK Maxx, for instance, and go and have a run, a 5-mile run down the road. Oh no, I didn't like it, I'll put it back on the shelf. So sometimes these professional shops are pretty good to go to for once or twice, once a year or once every 2 years even, just to make sure that your style is it changing? Can I get away with less absorbency? And then you'll look at, you'll put it on and you'll think, ooh, is the fit right? Yeah, does it push against my tendon? Can I tie it to sort of like to stay on the foot absolutely perfectly? Perhaps half a size big. If my foot swells, will it just swell to about nice and full? are there any pressure points when I've got a cold foot putting it in? Because if there's any pressure points when you put it in, your foot's going to swell and it's going to push against that pressure point. So even if it's a slight pressure point, especially in the insole, if you got it in the instep, for instance, if it's got a high instep and you're not used to a high instep, and you can feel it pushing against the instep of your foot, think about it. Your foot swells half a size, a full size, and that slight pressure is going to be a lot more, and you could be getting blisters down there, which is not a good idea. You have to look at the price. I would certainly be thinking, where am I on this journey of running? So, are you at the beginner? In which case, you're really going to have to try and get that price range that's going to be slightly less robust in the bottom of the shoe. It's going to be one piece of material usually that's slightly well designed, but not as rubbish as the cheap stuff. But it's not as advanced as the amateur shoe. And then going on to the middle range, you're going to be thinking, well, we can afford a little bit of time to be spent on that bottom of the sole. We need a shoe with what we've just mentioned, plus perhaps we can have less foam and start to pull that little change that I mentioned in, and say, what, less foam, a little bit more absorbency in the bottom of the shoe. Yeah, really good. And then as you start getting into the amateur status, this is where they start to look like for a feather light shoe. There's very little absorbency needed if your performance is that good as amateurs usually are. There's very little absorbency needed because their body takes it up quite well. There will be a certain amount, and it will be well designed into these brilliant shoes, because that's where the time and the money is spent, and that's why they cost so much. So that's the bullet point. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Please give me a like and subscribe. I do try and do one. I try and do one a week, and the way I do it is by looking at what other people are putting out and trying to make things a little bit different for you. If you do like it, then please tell me so, and we can try and look at anything that you particularly want to know. So if you've got an idea that you want me to cover, then please do. I'm always open to suggestions. So please like, subscribe, and it's Senior Runner here, over and out.